Hello, members. Welcome to another edition of Heat Treat Live here today on this Wednesday. Excited to be here with you and everybody and have our guests, our panel today. We're excited you're tuning in and appreciate your time. So today I'd like to welcome you. The first thing I always like to make people aware of is down in your right-hand corner. If you see below your screen, you'll see it says chat. If you click that, the chat box will pop up on your right, and it's very easy. You just click in the bottom there where it says type message here. And we'd love to see you type in where you're listening from. We always like to see where our members are listening from, as well as if you have a question and or comment. We've seen people actually answer questions through the chat line. If you have a question and or comment for this panel, we'd love for you to click in there and then just type in your question. I'll be monitoring those questions and we'll ask them to the panel as they come up and going through this. So the Nadcap audit notice went out this past week on how Nadcap and PRI is dealing with COVID crisis and how it impacts you as a member in your audit process and compliance. And so today, that's what this whole thing is about, is deciphering and getting clarification on those issues so you know exactly what you need to do and you're on the same page. What is not on this call going to happen is we're not going to talk about any individual audit issues. We're not going to talk about anything on the Nadcap agendas for any meetings. What we really want to stay focused on is the clarification of anything that you do not understand with regard to the notice that went out. We're going to have Mark from Nadcap explain that notice in detail. Then we got Jim, Ed, and Bob, who will obviously ask questions, and you can ask questions in the line as well, and I'll be monitoring those. So before we get started, I would really like to have everyone introduce themselves, where they're from. I know some of our members have seen everybody on here, but just gives new people a chance to go. So Mark, we'll start with you.
Sure. My name is Mark Burval. I'm a staff engineer for PRI, and PRI administers the Nadcap program. I am an engineer for multiple industries, and one of those industries is Nadcap, and within that industry, I do heat treat. So I was asked to come on board here and kind of decipher the wording that was put out in this notice and give you any help that I can. So appreciate the opportunity to put a voice to the words.
So you're going to be our Nadcap translator is what it's going to be, right?
Decoder ring. How about that?
Jim?
Yeah, I'm Jim Oakes, from Super Systems in Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm the current MTI president, and I really thank you, Mark, for joining us today.
You know, I love about doing this with Jim is I told Jim when I recruited him and talked to him about being president, many members said they'd love to see him be president. And I said, look, this is really a good time. It's almost an easy deal going through because you're just catering to the members. You make them excited and happy. And Jim, how's that working out for you this year?
Yeah, Corona, COVID-19. So it's
right. A year unlike any I've ever seen for a president, for sure.
Yeah, sure. It is unreal but it's not, it's for everybody. Everybody's
right. Exactly. So Ed?
Yeah, Ed Engelhard, Solar Atmospheres, and welcome, Mark. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Bob?
Yeah, I'm Bob Ferry from FPM Heat Treating out of Chicago. And yeah, I'd like to really appreciate you coming on board, Mark. This could help explain everything that PRI has just recently posted, and we just look forward to the event here.
Awesome. So Jim, I would love to come to you first, just as president. I know we had our first president's briefing last week on the COVID crisis and where we're at and how we're doing things. And so any comments you have for the members out there that are listening in? Most of these, I'm sure almost all of them are Nadcap aerospace related heat treaters. So what's some words to the wise you can have?
Well, I mean, last week, was that it was actually on the date that the notice came out from Nadcap for these new rules, if you will, the COVID-19 rules, because there was lots of concern out there, not only about potentially expiring accreditations, but also from outside service providers getting access to plants and some of the restrictions and this and the other thing. So when talking with our Technical Standards Committee with Bob and Ed, who've been doing a great job on all aspects here, we thought, okay, well, why don't we see if we can get somebody from PRI, answer the questions, kind of what their thoughts are, the processes for going through it. So, it's just an opportunity right now with all the unknowns. We are trying to navigate waters that we did not foresee, and nobody's ever had planned anything like this. So if we can provide clarity in any way, then let's provide that back to the membership. That's what this organization is all about. is taking care of the members and, access to information like we've done on heattreat.net with the coronavirus resources. And then, doing something like this for the members is why we're all MTI members. So,
right.
So that's, my quick 2 cents. I thanks to our Technical Standards Committee and Mark for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. We've appreciated your level of positivity and the big smile and keeping everybody pumped up and rallying through these webcasts. I know everybody's kind of hanging out by themselves in their homes going, what's going on outside these doors? So we're just trying as MTI to bring that light of hope that we're going to get through this, but you got to do things in between here and getting there to be successful. So appreciate you. So Mark, to you. So the notice came out, I guess, a week or so ago, or how long ago was it been that it went out? Just so everybody knows.
It went out on the 7th of April.
Awesome. So I know most everybody's probably read it, but I know there's some things that would like to get clarified. So let's just start at the top and kind of work down. So I know the June meeting's out there. That's in London, correct?
I'm sorry. Go ahead and say, what was that question?
The June meeting. I hear are they still going to have the meeting in June according to the notice?
As of right now, the meeting is still scheduled to occur in June in London. That will be, of course, pending,
right,
the final determination as to how this rolls out. But as of this point in time, we are intending to have the meeting in London, but our auditor training only in October.
Gotcha. So I'll just kind of let you start at the top at the audit compliance stuff and just kind of work your way down and give everybody an overview of what the main highlights of the letter are.
Sure. So Nadcap recognized that there were going to be issues due to the coronavirus and started working on the approach that would be taken to addressing all the audits across all the commodities within Nadcap. And the leadership team worked with the NMC and the Nadcap Management Council to come up with this document to give us the guidelines for handling the audits. And the intent here is to handle 99+% of all the situations and give everybody a good guidelines as to how things were to be approached. So yes, there's probably going to be some exceptions somewhere, but this should handle the majority of everything that's going on. I have it here in front of me. I'm looking at it, but so I'm just going to go through briefly. It was written with a purpose and approval, and the applicability, and it goes through the response from the meetings that were going to take place in June, the auditor conference, things that are important to how we structure the program. But moving into section 4.3, I think is where our audience here is going to be specifically interested in. And it's audit response deadlines and cumulative delinquencies. As most people would know, if you exceed your deadlines for the responses, the system will start counting delinquency days. And basically, the system automatically does that. There is no way for us to stop the counting from occurring. That'll just be accumulating. But what we've asked in 4.3.1 is that if you're having a problem with doing responses because of the coronavirus, reach out to your staff engineer or your reviewer, make sure they're aware that you're having situations. And then when the audit finally closes, when it's all said and done, we are guiding the task groups to waive any punitive impact of having any delinquency days, such that it doesn't affect your merit in the case of delinquency. So that's pretty straightforward. Again, just saying we don't want to cause a penalty for something that's really beyond the issues that are happening at all over the place. Section 4.4 talks about external service providers, calibrating houses, personal qualifications, things of that nature. Basically, what we're saying here is you need to look at your own area and see where you're going to have some difficulties in getting some information, either information or activities done by calibration houses, mostly your providers for pyrometry. And then make a risk assessment of where you're at, and then you need to talk to your customers about what actions you're going to take place. Specifically, from the external providers, we have multiple sections in 4.4.4 that talk about specification requirements, and the big thing there is Nadcap itself doesn't have the authority to grant deviations to specification requirements. Therefore, if your calibration is not going to take place, you're really going to need to talk to your customers and the subscribers to say, here's what's happening, here's my plan, here's my logic. They may come back with you with their specific requirements, and each one of them is going to have a different answer to you. 4443 talks about upcoming audits. You know, in that case, this is, you know, these also deal with, you know, what the auditor is going to be looking for when he comes on site. He said, basically, we want to make sure that this has all been cleared up prior to the audit. If you're delinquent on the calibration, it should be documented in your system. You should have all the information lined up and saying, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing, here's our approval. That's all set up. We're not too worried about it. 445 talks about Nadcap audit criteria requirements. And those areas are, again, this was written for all commodities. And basically, it's not applicable to heat treat to the best of our knowledge. We do not have any Nadcap criteria invoked requirements for calibrations or that nature. They're either in the specifications or they're done internally to your organization. Which leads us to 446, which is what the auditee defines a frequency requirement for a calibration. And then that is handled basically in 4461, where the highlight of that is the auditee needs to demonstrate appropriate internal approval for temporary deviations. So that you've identified it, you've documented what you're doing, and your system is taking care of it. Moving on to 4.6, which is outside of the audit itself. These are expiring accreditations. As you're well aware, these audits are being moved out. And if it hasn't affected you, it probably will, which we'll talk about in a moment. But, you know, historically, the extensions were allowed by the procedure to be 3 months. Staff engineers would grant those, typically because there was a scheduling issue and things were not a big problem. Now with the volume of reschedules that are happening, it's anticipated that these extensions are going to be taking a life of their own over the next at least 6 months. And the plan is it's been approved as the staff engineers will be allowed to grant 3-month extensions multiple times, but not to exceed 12 months. What's happening is in 446, in general, the audits are being rescheduled to the next audit quarter, and extensions are going to be granted to accommodate that change. In heat treat, that will mean that future audits will be pushed out even farther. That is to say, we're not having an extension where somebody says, I can't have an audit. They go to the back of the line. They're actually moved up as soon as they can, but that may push somebody else down like a domino effect. So even though you may not be impacted directly, you may find in October your audit got moved because somebody else had to be put in place. So prioritizing first in, first out type of a philosophy. So don't be surprised if you get an audit moved on you, unfortunately. And I think that's the bulk of it. It extends this group here. Export control is a unique thing. That'll be a one-off, and it'll be approved by management if we have to go that route. Whereas we'll do an export control job by a restricted auditor, and that pretty much we haven't addressed yet.
Right.
So I think I've hit the highlights of what's probably important to this group. At that point, I'll let it loose to anybody else.
Well, one question that's popped up on the screen early on, that's why we're doing these things here is the virtuality of a lot of different types of meetings. Is Nadcap considering any level of virtual audits to help the process at all?
Madcap itself has not approached it. They have considered it as a technique that may be used in the future, but it's not something that is being approached at this point in time.
Okay.
Mark, have you heard anything about PRI doing anything with ISO or 17025 with their audits?
So the registrar side of PRI is doing the virtual audits just as the balance of the industry is doing it that way. Okay. But the special process audits of Nadcap have not approached doing a virtual audit in replace of a full-blown audit. I would imagine that, again, there may be that one-off somewhere sometime depending on the situation, but the bulk of the audits are going to be this push out and do and claw back as the time allows.
Right. if that happens, though, that means that essentially your audit is going to expire, your accreditation is going to expire probably, right? So everybody's going to get put into this expiring audit issue.
Well, they'll be granted an extension, and therefore their accreditation will not expire.
Okay, so that'll happen when it reschedules. You'll get a grant for the extension.
No,
And it won't expire?
Generally speaking, when an audit is slid either forward or backward, it won't impact the next audit due date as far as when the accreditation will expire.
Mm.
But we also recognize that if for some situation a supplier is pushed out multiple quarters, then their next audit would also be pushed out. It would also be granted extensions so that we're not having back-to-back audits.
Right, okay.
Again, with the philosophy of first in, first out, we're not anticipating a lot of that. We're just anticipating this roll in the carpet that we're just trying to push down and hopefully can pull it out as we get moving through.
Yeah, okay.
Sid, I know you sent me, we discussed a few, what other questions you got going through your mind on this?
Yeah, so regarding external service providers who might not be able to make it in to conduct work that's related to audit criteria, things like pyrometry calibrations and such, or hardness tester service and calibration, what would the task group consider to be, say, an outline of a best practice on the part of an auditee to address that sort of thing?
Well, first and foremost, what has been recognized is, when you're forced to, in this case, essentially violate a specification, you're running at risk. And so the comments have always been around your need to talk to your subscribers to say, hey, here's my situation, and they may have requirements for you to do certain things. Nadcap subscribers are in a situation where different subscribers are being managed, different subscribers' opinions are being managed by different parts of their organization, whether it's engineering or quality. So there's not really one answer that can come out of Nadcap. I would hope maybe at the end of this we have some brainstorming about maybe good practices, but things that I would suggest if you want to minimize your exposure is, if you have multiple field test instruments and they're both expired, but you can do a TUS with both of them and or an SAT with both of them, at least validate each other and give yourself some sanity. But I think these are things that you guys have probably figured out that you want to talk about, where you have parallel systems that you can at least give yourself some comfort. Or more importantly, if your operators are noticing anything funny, drop a piece of equipment, they got to say something because it may not be working the way it's supposed to.
Well, that was actually my last question for the entire thing, so don't answer too many best practices.
Oh, okay. I'll let you guys get into that now. I'll chime in later. So,
Yeah.
Ed, are you good?
Oh, yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a similar question because, like as example for hardness testing, we did have some difficulty trying to get a regular guy to come in to do the indirect verifications. And so if that was the case where you just can't get the guy in because everybody's in shelter in place and they're freaking out over getting this coronavirus, I mean, in my mind, you should be able to you're doing your daily verifications, you're doing your hardness checks with your logs and records to ensure that the tester is still reading properly. Would that be acceptable in place of getting this indirect verification document for your audit?
Well, again, like I said, we can't approve that violation of the requirement. You have to identify that deficiency and contact your customers to say, I can't do this. This is what I am going to do. Here's what tools I have. I have 2 hardness testers. I have different hardness blocks. I'm going to do more daily verifications with a broader spectrum, whatever activities you may want to do, to say, here's how I feel more comfortable running at risk.
Okay.
But unfortunately, we can't authorize specification violations.
Yeah, I understand that. I just didn't know what people would find acceptable in that kind of a situation.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, if you also look at this document, it talks about what the subscribers should be doing, and they should be anticipating these questions and having their planned responses so that
Yeah.
they know how to answer it, what they're looking for.
Right. Okay.
Mark, do you think that they might publish a document such as that, so to get in front of it?
Because it's each individual subscriber is approaching it differently. I mean, we've talked about it, but because it's both quality and people involved with Nadcap, people not necessarily involved with Nadcap, we haven't seen a unified response just yet, or a portal to put it and manage it. As this draws out, we'll probably get more and more, but today we went out looking for it, but it really didn't come away that way.
Yeah. Okay.
So what if your audit date is approaching and you realize that for whatever reason, you're not going to be able to get your quality management system audited before the Nadcap audit, and you're going to expire on your QMS? What sort of provision is going to be made through the heat treat task group to handle that sort of circumstance?
Section 4.5 talks about the quality management system. I didn't read through it. Do you want me to go back over that area for highlights?
Well, I'm just, yeah, actually, and the other thing that it more broadly is the way the notice was sent and read, it looked like the various task groups could handle these matters in their own way within the boundaries of the general policy. So I'm particularly interested in what the heat treat task group might do if your QMS will expire before your accreditation runs out, or if it expires before your, just before, say, your next audit shows up, and you may be delayed in getting it recovered.
Well, I mean, to be honest, we haven't had a discussion with the task group about that particular point to make any,
Okay.
Obviously they were more concerned, or the industry was more concerned with calibrations, the outside service, which were the bigger questions,
Mm-hmm.
and then figuring out what's going on with the quality system is addressed here, and the task group hasn't had to deal with any issues with that. And I think as they come up, they'll figure out how to deal with those as they're approaching.
Okay. So the best advice you can give is if you know this is going to happen, get an email out, make a phone call, and start talking to your staff engineer and find out what arrangements can be made, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
So what else, gentlemen? What else? Any other questions? Y'all feel there's any element of unclarity in this section?
Well, yeah, I have another. Regarding export control, I see that there may be an allowance to allow restricted auditors to audit those facilities that might have export control information. And I presume that's going to have to be done very, very carefully, because a lot of parties are at risk to violate the ITAR or other export control regulation if any slip-ups occur. If you have a facility, or you're asked by PRI if you can accept a restricted auditor in your facility and you turn them down, well, do you think that will present a big problem? I know a lot of suppliers are going to just go, there's no way I'm having a restricted auditor here, I'll just wait. Would you be willing to go to an accreditation extension while we work out a plan to get an unrestricted auditor in?
I would say, again, we're not trying to be punitive to anybody for this situation.
Okay.
And in all honesty, that caveat would be mostly for the European and Asian locations.
Yeah.
If we're dealing with North American audience here, our auditors are basically all unrestricted and they're coming in. So it's more of a question where hypothetically we have a location where we have a facility that does one part to export control and everything else is not.
Yeah. So
okay,
you're okay.
rather than, okay, we have a local auditor, just make sure that part's not available. a shop is 99% export control, there's no way to do the audit without having a restricted auditor.
Okay.
So case by case with permission and some due diligence beforehand.
Okay. And are you been involved, or do you know where PRI is at with their, at the end of that notice, there was a statement regarding development of new or revised emergency policies to perhaps streamline address of these kind of situations. Do you know, has anything really taken place in that regard, and will suppliers be allowed to participate in that at all?
Above my pay grade. No, that's I think, you know, this situation highlighted that yes, we're going to need some type of a program. They're going to work on it at the highest levels and figure out what they want to do with it. And I have to imagine this will be a very large learning experience, so that we'll come out of this with a good roadmap of what we think we want to do in the future. Historically, we've always dealt with this as a small regional issue where forest fires or flooding, they were always handled. It just was not at this not quite at this magnitude.
Sure. And I do have one more question. Do you know, is Metacred going to be adopting these policies and the way they operate? Have you heard anything there?
Sure. Off topic from Nadcap. So Metacred is managed by a different management council. They are dealing with a different set of requirements. Specifically, FDA has oversight requirements. So they are looking at doing some type of an oversight policy activity to allow for the extensions to take place. Different set of rules, different set of guidelines, and those are in the process of being worked on. I really can't say any more than that at this point.
Sure. Okay, thanks. I think that's all the questions I have at the moment.
Well, one of my big questions, Mark, and this is even for Ed and Bob and Jim. So with some of these changes and how we're having to do business a little bit differently, audit compliance a little differently, maybe shifting deadlines, where do you feel the trip ups are going to be for a typical heat treater? Where are some areas that they may not pay attention to, or in the focus of all the stuff going around that could cause them issues in their audit compliance? Or is there anything that you feel they need to pay closer attention to just because of how we're operating in this environment?
Well, I would say that, you know, certainly it depends on at what point their audit is coming up when it's scheduled. Certainly, you know, I know with us, as the audit gets closer, like within, you know, 6 months, 4 months, 3 months, I mean, you're all hands on deck to make sure that everything is in good stead with your facility and all your documents. And of course, you have to provide all these documents within a month to the auditor. So if your facility has been, you know, kind of taken back to where you got half of your people there, and you don't have the people to help work on this audit, that could certainly hurt your ability to be prepared for the audit. So, I mean, that's one concern, depending on what the timing of your audit is. And I guess that's another reason why you would maybe call your staff engineer and auditor and just try to work something out as to when you can have your audit rescheduled. I guess what I'm hearing from Mark is, you know, if you are suspecting any issues coming up with the upcoming audit, you need to get a hold of the auditor and the staff engineers to just to try to work something out, just to make sure that you're prepared for this audit. At least that's the way I'm hearing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's you know, you need to talk if you're dealing with an inability to conduct the audit, we'll call it a scheduling issue. You can go straight to scheduling about having it pushed out. Dealing with the staff engineer really has to do with, as the audit is immediately approaching, if something suddenly changes. Next week's our audit and suddenly, hey, we can't have anybody come in. Yeah, that's when you definitely have to let us all know what's going on, because suddenly schedules are changing. But if you're shut down, you and your audit's in
Right.
3 weeks, you're in a situation where you don't know when you're coming back up.
Right.
But to add to your comment, you're talking about having significant reductions in workers.
Mhm.
The focus you're going to need to keep track of is how well your training program is documenting if people are doing different jobs than they're normally doing, because you're going to get caught up on that with an audit coming in as he looks back at work during this time of distress.
Mhm. Okay.
Well, it looks like Robert Peters on that, the record keeping, he said record keeping looks like it'll be an area where people that can be tripped up on. They need to make sure they pay it, especially with less people. Like you said, Mark, making sure they understand all the steps they need to be putting in the here and there as far as records. Now, Joanna Lisa did just post out that, to Ed's question, that the Nadcap Management Council is forming a sub-team to write general emergency documents, and several suppliers have volunteered, with herself included, to participate on that team. So it looks like they do have some progress in that area to start looking at new procedures.
Joanna's above my pay grade.
Joanna's great. Joanna's great. So I was going to go to any other question. Go ahead, Jim.
I was just going to ask Mark. I mean, are there any issues right now? Obviously, everybody's work has been impacted with working from different locations. Are there any issues getting a hold of subscribers? Should our members be contacting them now to just in anticipation that it might be delayed a little bit, or do you feel, based off of your conversations, that you're getting back quickly at this point?
Are you talking about the audits, or are you rescheduling audits?
For specifically looking at for external service providers,
okay.
When the suppliers or the heat treaters are looking for guidance, will they have issue with getting a hold of any of the subscribers?
To my knowledge, they're all working. I haven't heard anything of, obviously there may be a delay here or there because some companies may ask people to take some time off, but in general, they're still covering it, or they've had a backup involved.
Okay.
I have not heard anything from a supplier saying, I can't get a response, but it's only been out for a week, this document.
Right.
So they all are pretty much aware this is coming down the pipe, that people are going to be asking it. And some of them are heat treaters themselves, so they're dealing with the same problems.
Yeah.
Mm. So one other question, in the spirit of what's going on in the country, I know PRI has had a policy that if you have to reschedule your audit within a short period of time of your audit happening, that they're going to charge you for that. And then, then you still have to pay for it when you reschedule. Are they going to waive that recharge fee?
If you're rescheduling due to the coronavirus issue, there is no fee.
Okay, good.
It's not the purpose of that fee.
Just making sure.
So here's an actual scenario, Mark, that was just posted to get your input on. So they have an audit scheduled for June 8th, and their accreditation expires on October 31st. Should they respond to the email from the scheduler that they want to go forward with the audit, but like everybody else, they just don't know. The biggest concern is that we are not allowed to perform a full self-audit due to COVID-19, and thus we may not have the checklist completed prior to the 30-day requirement. So how would someone handle that issue?
Well, I mean, obviously, reach out to your auditor, explain the situation. If you're shut down and you're anticipating being open to conduct the audit at that time, it would make sense that you don't have you're not on site to do those activities or as much as you want as possible. Right. We're not looking to penalize anybody for this, so it should be a reasonable and valiant effort to do the self-audit and upload the documents. Communicate with the auditor. They'll document when he was communicated with and what was posted, and we shouldn't have any issues.
Okay. All right, good. So any other things going through post online, folks? If you've got a question, we're all here. Jim, Ed, Bob, anything else going through your mind that seems unclear?
Well, I know we were talking just before we jumped on, and I just want to let everybody know that Mark said there's no COVID-19 with any auditors that he is aware of. So if your audit's scheduled, it's probably going to happen. And I would say that you want to make sure that if you have a situation with COVID-19, you definitely have to get a hold of PRI ahead of time, right?
Well, I think that's what we're hearing, Mark, amongst the whole thing from you, is that if there's something out of the ordinary that's impacting whether lower employeeship, being able to meet your 30-day requirement or whatever, get a hold of your staff engineer, the schedule, whichever one you feel like you need to do to get that ahead of that, as opposed to waiting until the last minute.
Staff engineer or the auditor who's assigned to it, if that's already been taken care of. Obviously, with as many audits that are impacted, we're trying not to deal with every email that comes in. That's why these documents we're trying to put forward. And It gives us the outline of how to handle this. It's non-punitive. That's the goal.
Right. So to kind of move into turn 4, moving towards the end. So what is, I mean, we talked about kind of tips or best practices between here while we're dealing with this issue. Your input, tips, and best practices people should be walking away with to really move from where we're at.
I would chime in to say, if you've got any equipment that runs on the edge and you can't necessarily verify its calibration or its performance through a pyrometry test, you may want to consider not running that piece of equipment.
Okay.
If you can barely pass a TUS, you may not want to run that very long.
Right.
Okay.
Ed, Bob, Jim, anything y'all are hearing, anything y'all would encourage members to be thinking through as they're moving through this challenging moment?
Yeah, I'd say if you approach your audit date, or if you know you're going to have a problem with maintaining your QMS certificate, you want to be talking a lot to the staff engineer, maybe scheduling, and the auditor, so that you know that everybody's informed, up to date, and decisions get made with everybody who's involved in the loop, so that nothing happens. And sometimes this might come as terribly short notice. I know for Solar's part, we're having any visitors that do show up, and there's gotten to be quite a few less than there were. But anybody who does has to sign off an affidavit regarding their relative best guess to health. And if there's any doubts, they may get turned away at the door at that time, which is going to cause a real scramble if that does happen. I hope it doesn't, but it could. And you need to be aware of it, and you want to have a plan of action in place to address it if it comes to that quick of a turn down of your audit schedule. You're going to want to be on the phone. And finally, a lot of the membership for MTI is executive level folks. Your quality people are having to do their normal work if you're up and running full, plus juggle this new environment as well. And they're under a lot of pressure. They're going to need a lot of support. So please, when you start loading up your quality people, keep in mind the amount of effort they're having to put into to do the normal stuff and figure out ways to keep things on the straight and narrow through these times. It's not going to be easy. It might take some overtime, may take some odd hours to get it all done. Just be flexible and supportive. That's what they really need.
Awesome comments, Ed. So Mark, a little quick follow-up question, speaking of the scheduling. So the person who had the audit in June when his accreditation is expiring in October, he asked, would you recommend that he keep the June audit and just reach out to the auditor? Or would it be possible, he said, what I just heard, would it be possible that his audit would be given to another auditee that's being pushed out, and would his be rescheduled?
Well, anything can happen, but I guess the point would be, if the auditee is completely acceptable at having the audit take place with the auditor assigned, I wouldn't move it out.
Okay.
Because we're going to try to get it done.
Right.
But this is very dynamic. Things are changing. Companies are having policy changes. Auditors could have a health change.
Yeah.
You could have regional travel issues enforced. The next thing you know, it can be flexible.
Right.
Plan for it to happen, but be flexible.
Gotcha.
And if something has to change, we're not penalizing people because of it.
Gotcha. Awesome. All right.
Yeah, I would say, just to comment on that, if you're, if this coronavirus situation has put you in a position where you're not feeling ready for your audit, you might want to contact a PRI and just see if you can reschedule. Last thing you want to do is go through a Nadcap audit and not be prepared.
Right, exactly. Well, I think that's kind of the premise of everything we've been talking about is if there is something that's going to cause you to not be prepared, get in touch with your auditor or scheduler,
Right.
and just talk that out. Because everybody, like Mark said, everybody's got to be flexible in this moment, but you also have to be reasonable. You're not going to get stuff rescheduled just because you didn't do what you were supposed to do in the first place.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ed.
I see a question here about ISO certifications. Nadcap, well, really doesn't have anything to do with the ISO or AS certifications you might carry, but the party, your certifying body or registrar, if you will, does know what the policies are within the ISO world. And right now, it looks like they are working very hard to make sure audits can be done as remotely as possible, unless there are aspects of your business where the auditor has to be on the floor. And another question that sort of sidelines that is PRI considering doing any virtual audits. Nadcap and a Medicred audit cannot be done virtually because it does require auditor time on the floor, looking at work, witnessing things. That's a lot less true in an AS or an ISO setting. So you need, if you have a question about your AS or ISO audit, you have to be going to your registrar and talking to them about the details of how they're going to handle that. And hopefully it can be arranged in such a way that you don't run your certificate out. But and they're being pretty flexible, at least as much as IAQG can be. And I think PRI is being pretty flexible, and I, for one, very much appreciate this, the notice that was sent out and the efforts that are being made to minimize the impact on the industry by and large here. It's really helpful.
What are you saying, Ed? That it's not good enough for auditor to watch you put product in the furnace from a virtual iPhone camera and make a grade on that?
Well, it may not. Although they're talking about doing that for AS and ISO,
right?
Where they have to be on a shop floor, they might ask you to make some kind of arrangement to bring a camera to the floor, but that's all that is going to take a lot of communication between the parties to make it happen, and a lot of technology has to work right, and people have to have confidence on what they're looking at when they look at it. So
sure,
it's a tough situation. We've built our world around being present with other people, and all of a sudden we're not allowed to do that, or we're too ill to do that. It's kind of an interesting time.
Yep.
So, Mr. Jim, our president,
yes.
Any last words of wisdom from you to the group?
I just, it's great that, the PRI Nadcap stepped up and recognized this, got that out pretty quickly. I mean, it was, early on there was a question, but I was talking to a member just right after that. So I think it's great. You joining Mark is fantastic for our group. I mean, there's a lot of passionate heat treaters that are part of MTI, and everybody on this call wants to do the right thing and make sure that they can maintain their accreditation and keep things rolling. So we all want to be busy.
Right.
So we definitely want to be busy, and we want to maintain this and keep things rolling. So that's about it. I just, thanks for joining us, and, thanks Bob and Ed, like always. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Jim. Thank you for all your work as president.
Thanks,
Ed and Bob, thank you all for being here. And Mark, really especially thank you on short notice for being here and really trying to be clarifying things for the members out there. So thank you for being a part of this.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys.
Well, members, thank you again for being a part of another Heat Treat Live on Nadcap. And the notification, we will have other webcasts coming up. Remember, to stay informed, go to our heattreat.net site and click on the coronavirus resource page. Every single day, if not weekly, there is so much out there that is changing, and we're putting it out there for you to look at and have what you need to weather the storm in the next 4 to 6 months. So if you haven't seen the one we did last week with Buster Crosley, Mary Springer, and Glenn Ottinger on the practicality of dealing with payables, payroll, and bankers, you need to go out there and look at that. Lots of very good stuff in dealing with how you're operating every single day. But thank you so much for attending today. And remember, you're not just strong, you're always MTI strong, members. Have a great day. I will see you soon.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.